The premise of How I Met Your Mother is one man's search for love and all the lessons that he had to learn along the way to be ready to receive love. And when it comes to this show, I feel like it has a certain philosophy to it. So I wanted to explore all of Ted's main relationships on the show to try to see what the show is trying to say about dating and love and marriage and commitment. So let's start from the beginning.
Tonight, we will make a memory that will never be tarnished.
Victoria is the first relationship of Ted's that we see on the show. So he meets her because he goes to Claudia's and Stuart's wedding, and at the wedding, he sees Victoria across the room, and it's a love at first sight kind of moment. They strike up a conversation, they start flirting. Victoria tells him that she does not hook up with guys at weddings, and she decides that maybe perhaps tonight they just have a magical night together. They don't exchange information, they don't share their names, they don't give each other's phone numbers. That way, this moment will always remain magical. He agrees to this, and this whole thing is very reminiscent of Before Sunrise, which is a film by Richard Linklater. It came out in 1995, and it's just so romantic. And it's about two people who get off the train in Vienna and just walk around all day, and they fall in love just from very basic conversation. And this is kind of similar to what Victoria and Ted end up doing. They have an amazing night together. They have a lot of fun where they try to steal the bouquet. She tap dances, she does a cartwheel, he plays the piano. So they find a way to just have a ton of fun just with each other, and they don't even care about the wedding. And at the end of it all, they separate, and Ted doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know who he is. And it's important to note that at this point, Ted has been aggressively chasing Robin, that he wanted to take Robin to Claudia and Stuart's wedding, and he was super excited to have her there, but she was offered an anchor role that night, and so she couldn't go. So it's important to consider the fact that Ted is basically on the rebound. He's been chasing Robin up to this point, and then Victoria enters his life. And once they start dating, it's very romantic between them. And for us as the audience, it's played for laughs. We're supposed to be mocking and laughing at how romantic and over the top Ted and Victoria are based on how Marshall and Lily react. And on the podcast, How We Made Your Mother, Josh Radnor has said that it was kind of whiplash for him to go from a truly romantic kind of a scenario where he and Victoria really bond and it's really beautiful at the wedding, and then it jumps into mockery.
Honey, could you hold my hair back? I think I'm gonna hurl.
But of course, this is a sitcom and they do have to do things for laughs. And I think it's also really beautiful how at the wedding, they are able to bond in a way that feels simple and it's not too over the top. It's just two people getting to know each other. And Ted does do a grand romantic gesture for Victoria, but it still feels very understated. After the wedding, he realizes that he must find her. And so he searches, he calls Claudia, he calls Stuart. He finds out that she was the baker, and he shows up at her bakery and he's wearing his bleach-stained sweatshirt and his clothing that he always wears at home, and he just comes there and it's very romantic because she's super happy that he found her as well. And it's that kind of romantic moment that feels tailored to her rather than this grandiose gesture of dozens of flowers or an orchestra. It's simple and it's cute because it works for Victoria. And I have to admit that when I first watched the show, I really didn't like Victoria. And it wasn't because I was rooting for Ted and Robin, but the whole thing with Victoria of being overly romantic, their whole extreme, like soul-searching kind of moment on the couch together, and the whole idea of let's not find out anything about each other, let's just have this magical romantic night, just felt so over the top, saccharine and sweet and overly romantic. And so it came off as cheesy to me. And I think that that's why I didn't really like Victoria that much. I didn't hate her as a character, but it just felt like it was just too much. But on rewatches, I have to say that given what I know what's coming and appreciating who Ted is as a character, she is perfect for Ted in that moment. And it makes sense for Ted. Ted likes the cheesiness. He likes the romance. She works for him. And she is someone who can sit on the couch with him and stare into his eyes and ask him, what makes you cry? So that works for Ted. It might not work for everybody, but I think that this show does try to be over the top sometimes because it tries to bring up the comedy. But in hindsight, I do think that the way that this played out in terms of how romantic it is works for Ted as a character. And so in the first season, there isn't really anything bad that one can say about Victoria. She's very sweet to Robin, even though Robin is continuously mean to Victoria. I mean, she's very passive aggressive towards her, and Victoria just kind of sweeps this to the side. Victoria finds out that Ted used to really like Robin and that he re-returned for her. And even though Victoria is upset by this, she takes it in stride. And she even plays a little prank on Ted by putting a fake vomit toy on his doorstep, showing the fact that she's willing to joke about it. She's willing to get past it. So she has become a bigger person in the fact that she tries to bond with Robin, even though Robin is passive aggressive towards her. And she was nice to Robin at the wedding. And she's just very good for Ted. And we also see that Victoria tries to bond with Lily by offering to look at wedding dresses because she's in the industry. So she really tries to bond with the group, and the group does seem to like her. And then 2 months after dating, Victoria gets offered a donut fellowship in Germany that's supposed to be a year. And so she's considering whether or not she should take it. And she really likes Ted, but at the same time, they've only been dating for 2 months and doesn't make sense for her to put her career on the back burner for someone that she's only known for 2 months. Ted is facing the same challenge where he really likes her, but at the same time, he can't really ask her to stay because he doesn't really know her that well. And so what ends up happening is something that the show does quite often, which is where after Victoria has a conversation with Robin, she walks away with this feeling of, I want to make this work, because Robin kind of comes around and she says, Ted is a great guy. And so Victoria thinks, perhaps I should stay for him because he's worth it. And then Ted walks away with this feeling of, I don't know Victoria well enough, so perhaps she should go. And then when they actually meet up, Victoria says that she has to go to Germany and Ted asks her to stay. And then they decide to have a great day together. They spend all day together and it's great. He walks her to the airport and both of them, because they don't want to leave each other, they run towards each other saying, let's try to make long distance work. So it's clear that they're both kind of pushing and fighting for this relationship. And then everything goes south once she goes off to Germany. So once she's in Germany and she's abroad for about a month, she has sent him like 3 care packages. He has sent her 0. And he starts talking to Robin about the fact that she's super far away and it's not really working. We see that he even falls asleep while talking to her. So it's clear that she's putting in a lot more effort than he is. And then she writes him a letter saying we have to talk. And Ted interprets this as she's going to break up with me. And so we know how all of this ends. So Ted ends up going to Robin's place because she calls him at 2 o'clock in the morning. And when Victoria calls, she picks up the phone and Robin is on the other end. So then Victoria finds out that Ted was going to cheat. And he does cheat because he lies to Robin, saying that he did break up with Victoria. They hook up and then he and Victoria end up breaking up over the phone. So up to this point, Ted and Victoria seem kind of great together, and it's really Ted who starts screwing up once Victoria goes abroad. But before that, they are super into each other. It seems like they want to spend all their time together. They don't want to leave each other. They really want to make it work. And Victoria even says that Ted might be the one. So she's completely infatuated with him. But then it's very clear that Ted always had one foot out the door.
I had that other phone, and it was good. But I think the whole time a little part of me wanted this phone instead. This phone feels right.
So he tells Robin in his own metaphorical way that even though he liked Victoria, he was always secretly hoping and always wanting Robin. So from his end, he wasn't all in, even though Victoria seemed to be all in. And as soon as Victoria's gone, she's putting in the effort and Ted is not. And so it's nice to see that they're actually breaking up at the end, even though it's kind of a disservice to Victoria at the fact that all we're getting is a phone call and Ted had already cheated at this point.
I loved you.
Did you?
Yes.
The story of Victoria could have ended in season 1, and I think it would have preserved this character and preserved this relationship dynamic. But unfortunately, we get a second part to this saga, which happens in season 7. And this is where Victoria goes from great to kind of bad. So Ted runs into Victoria at the architect's ball, and he comes up to her and he apologizes to her.
I'm really, really sorry.
And Victoria says that it's not necessary, which is kind of odd. So last we left off, he cheated on her and the relationship had already been declining by the fact that he stopped putting in an effort because he was falling asleep on the phone. He wasn't sending her any care packages, even though she was. And then he blatantly just cheats on her. And here she is saying, It's all good. Don't worry about it. And making things worse is that Robin is Ted's date at the architect's ball.
I stole your boyfriend. That was like crazy.
But Victoria is reacting very calmly, which, good for her. That's great. But then Ted is like, let me wash your dishes. I want to make amends. I'm very sorry for what happened. And she lets him, which is her choice. So he goes to wash her dishes and he says that he's not trying anything. He's not making a move. He just wants to make amends. And I call bullshit on that. Why would you travel all the way just to wash your dishes because you just feel bad? But anyway, this is where the writers kind of help Ted out. So we find out that Victoria's getting engaged and she feels bad about the fact that Ted came all the way over to wash her dishes. And we could tell that at this point, Ted is kind of sad and disappointed. So clearly he wasn't just trying to make amends. And he is sad about the fact that Victoria is about to get engaged to a man named Klaus. And this is where the writers make Victoria look kind of bad because Klaus was one of her classmates when she was in Germany. And Ted asks her, when did they start dating? And they start dating the day after Ted and Victoria broke up. So it is clear that Victoria was cheating emotionally while she was with Ted. And okay, so perhaps maybe some people will see this as not as bad, but I think that emotionally cheating is equally as bad. And perhaps one could explain this away by the fact that she wasn't cheating and Klaus was purely just a friend. And it really just turned romantic literally the day after. But, that's not what the writers are trying to convey. And it's a good way to explain why Victoria didn't need Ted's apology because she also felt guilty herself that she wasn't being completely faithful to him at the same time. And so they both messed up in that relationship. And so then Ted and Victoria end up having a romantic moment. And this is where we get to an interesting point where Ted says that he regrets what happened 6 years ago.
Okay, I will never stop regretting it because what we had meant that much to me.
Also, bullshit.
I had that other phone, and it was good. But I think the whole time a little part of me wanted this phone instead. This phone feels right.
The moment that he thought that perhaps maybe she wanted to break up is when he decided to cheat. So it took him no time. And even the whole time that when he was with Victoria, he still had it out for Robin because that's what Ted actually said. And when she was abroad, Ted didn't seem to be as invested. So did Victoria mean that much to him? Or is this something where he's just overcome with his own romantic feeling again? But Ted is very effective at being overly romantic. And also Josh Radnor is great at this role and being romantic. And he's very convincing. So Victoria and Ted have a romantic moment. They end up kissing, which makes Victoria look really bad. And after they kiss, and this is another moment again where I feel like the show seems like it's going to go in one direction and then it pivots really quick. So it seems like Victoria is falling back in with Ted. But as soon as she kisses him, she says, I realize I have to marry Klaus. He walks her to the bus stop and he asks her, why not? I don't want you to get on this bus. Please be with me. And the way that he asks is just so romantic.
What would our lives be right now if we just held on? Would I have still run into you at this party tonight, or would we have been there together?
And this is where Victoria says something that's very critical, which is the fact that all of Ted's relationships have failed for one reason, and that's Robin. And Robin is the reason why she's getting on this bus, and as long as Robin is around, it's never going to work. Because from her perspective, Ted cheated on Victoria with Robin, and then the next time that Victoria sees him, Robin is his date. And she also knows that they hang out all the time as friends. It's just not a healthy dynamic. But I also don't think it's fair to say that Robin is the reason why all of Ted's relationships failed. At this point, Ted has had a few failed relationships, including Stella and Zoe. And with Stella, she did leave him at the altar. Yes, partially it's tied to the fact that he invited Robin to the wedding, but it's not really tied too much to Robin as it is tied to Tony. So I don't know if it's fair to entirely blame that breakup on Robin.
I love Stella. She's the one. If you really feel that way, I guess it's a good thing you're not coming to the wedding after all.
That even if Robin attended the wedding, Stella could have still married Ted and they could have still been together. So it was Stella's decision to leave. In that case, it was Stella's ex that played a bigger role. And then with Zoe, I don't think that Robin played any role in the breakup between Ted and Zoe. But when it comes to Victoria, most certainly Robin is the biggest obstacle.
Where should we go? Your place? My place? We could go on my honeymoon. Just kidding.
So the story could have ended there with Victoria and Ted at the bus stop, but it doesn't. And this is where Victoria goes from kind of bad to terrible, or just so much worse. Basically, in season 7, Robin points out to Ted that Ted claims that he's looking for love, but he's really not. He's going after all these women who are unavailable. So he went after Robin, even though she was emotionally unavailable. He went after Stella, even though Stella had a kid and was still in love with her ex. Although that one's kind of unfair. I feel like Ted had no way of knowing that Stella was still in love with her ex, and the fact that Stella has a kid shouldn't really be a sign for the fact that he shouldn't go for her. In fact, if Ted is who he says he is and he's looking for love, marriage, and children, it would be great to go after a woman who has a child, is so ready to settle down. I mean, she has a house and a kid already. All she needs is a husband. They can go ahead and have more kids. So I don't think that Robin pointing out Stella is a sign that Ted is going after the wrong women. He really had no way of knowing that Stella was still in love with her ex, and we really don't find out anything about that until they're engaged. And Robin points out that he went after Zoe, even though Zoe was married. So Robin does have a point in the fact that he tends to go for some of these women who are unavailable. And she says that he has to make his own destiny. He should go for Victoria because he shouldn't just sit around and wait for destiny to happen. And this is where Ted holds baby Marvin, and he realized that he's nowhere close to where Lily and Marshall are in their life. So he decides to call Victoria. And Victoria shows up in a wedding dress. And she says that last year in the fall, she was ready to leave Klaus for Ted because she really wants to be with Ted, but she hesitated because of Robin. And yet she's still sitting there, and she says that she has a car parked outside and she's ready to drive off into the sunset. And so Ted decides to drive off into the sunset with Victoria, and as they're driving, again, this show does this quite a lot when you pay attention, is that he wants to go and have this happy future with her. And as they're driving, he realizes that he can't do that because he knows what it's like to be left at the altar, and it's just wrong. So as they're driving, he's like, no, you have to go back. But then again, they keep driving, and he drives past the church because he doesn't want to lose her again. And he thinks about all the times that he's lost her before, and he doesn't want it to happen. And so it ends with Ted deciding that, nope, I do want to be with her. I don't want this to end. Let's drive off into the sunset. And as they're driving, Ted finds out that Victoria didn't even leave a note. And this is where she just comes off in a terrible, terrible light, because not only did she not leave a note, she suggests sending a text message. And then when she decides to write a note after Ted convinces her, her notes are just awful.
Klaus, there is no easy way to tell you why I won't be marrying you today. Have a great summer, Victoria.
And then when Ted decides to leave a note, he runs into Klaus, who's also trying to run away from the wedding. And when he goes back to driving with Victoria, he wonders, why is Klaus leaving this wonderful woman? So he goes to talk to Klaus, and Klaus says that even though Victoria is wonderful, she's not the one. And this is where Klaus gives a very beautiful speech about love, about the one, about this destiny, this idea of the perfect person. And even though it sounds absolutely beautiful, what he says, I think, is just horseshit and a very dangerous message.
Lebenslanger Schiedsrichterschutz is not something that develops over time. It is something that happens instantaneously.
He says that love is not something that develops over time, it's instantaneous, as if initial infatuation is an absolute must, that it's a requirement, that love cannot be built. And I just think that it kind of sends the wrong message, and we have a contrast with Lily and Marshall in reality. And even though Lily and Marshall are shown in that clip, I think that what Lily and Marshall display is this idea that you have to choose every single day, that love is built over time, and that this initial infatuation is just that, it's infatuation. But after that, after you get past that point, love is about choosing the individual every single day and building upon that. And it goes back to the point that Lily and Marshall made about the fact that once you get after that honeymoon phase, then the real magic starts. It's about the simple moments. It's about the arguments. It's about the times that you are struggling together and you get past it, and that's how you get stronger together. And that is how love is built and developed. And so Klaus asks Ted if he ever felt this way, and Ted says, I think so.
If you have to think about it, you have not felt it.
But back to Victoria. So despite what Klaus says, Ted starts dating Victoria, and from the beginning of this particular relationship, of this point, This is a joke. So their relationship just starts off as very comical and ridiculous. And this version of Victoria is very different from the Victoria we saw in the first season. So we see that Klaus moves in with them because he lost his job and he got evicted. And I love the actor who plays Klaus. I'm forgetting his name, but he's very funny. And I do like him as an addition, but this whole dynamic is just meant purely for laughs. And this relationship is meant purely as a joke. Because Ted swoops in as the big hero saying, yes, Klaus can move in. Of course, then he starts to regret it, as most people would, because Klaus shows up, he stops wearing clothing, he brings his ferrets, and he walks around just naked in the house, and obviously it's intrusive. And Victoria is upset about this for some reason, for the fact that Ted offered, but now he's backtracking on this. Although I do have to say that by the end of the episode with Klaus, I do love how they're all sitting on the couch, watching and having a good time. So them as a throuple, so Ted, Klaus, and Victoria, I like to see it. And I feel like that as a comedic dynamic could have worked. That's a sitcom in and of itself, of Ted, Klaus, and Victoria living together with the ferrets. But anyway, they get past it, they find peace with Klaus, and then we see that Ted competes with Robin about how quickly his relationship is progressing. So at this point, Robin is dating Nick, Ted is dating Victoria, and they're competing to show who is happier in their relationship. And we see that Ted even RSVPs to a wedding with Victoria that's 6 months from now, showing that either he's competing really strongly with Robin or the fact that he's more willing to take those types of steps with another person. At this point, Victoria is practically living with him, and so they've gotten much closer. But we also see more elements or more sides to Victoria's character, like, for example, the fact that she's a slob, which was never presented before, and so again, plays up this fact of the fact that this time around, Victoria seems more like a joke than an actual real relationship. So she's turned into a more comedic character because she's super messy, and the whole thing with Klaus. And then she becomes very intense about getting married, which in some ways is fair because she left Ted for Klaus, who she was about to marry. And so she really wants to get married. But then again, we don't know how long they've been dating this time. So they only dated for about 2 months and 1 month long distance a while back when they were in their 20s. And now they've only been dating, a couple of months. And the other somewhat comical element that's introduced, but also is kind of absurd, is the fact that Victoria's father expects Ted to pay for her wedding because he's the quote unquote reason that the wedding didn't happen, which is an absolute lie. And it feels kind of cruel, kind of on Victoria's part, for the fact that this is a thing that's happening because Ted is paying back in installments for that wedding, which is stupid because Klaus was also running away from the wedding. All right, so back to the main point. So Victoria keeps dropping hints at the fact that she wants to get married, and Ted doesn't pick up on that, and Lily and Marshall have to point it out to him. And this is another frustrating element of the new Victoria character, at the fact that she's being very passive-aggressive about it, dropping hints rather than actually having a conversation about it like an adult. But to give Victoria some credit, there is a good explanation for why maybe she would be pushing for a wedding, which is the fact that she doesn't feel completely secure in the relationship. She doesn't feel like it's 100% all in, that there's something that's holding him back. So Ted decides to take the hint, and Victoria comes home to dozens of roses and to candles, and he proposes. And Victoria says yes. But after she says yes, she tells him that she doesn't want him to be friends with Robin. And this upsets Ted. He says that he doesn't love Robin, that they're just friends, and that he really wants to be Victoria, and that really Robin shouldn't stop them because he doesn't feel that way about her now, that he has proposed to Victoria. It's clear that he wants to be with her. And Victoria says, okay, fine, maybe you don't feel that way today, but what about tomorrow? What about a year from now? So you had those feelings, and those feelings could come back, and you guys have a very close relationship. And I think that Victoria has a very good point. And I do like how in this particular scene, Victoria does present it that she doesn't hate Robin. And it's shown the fact that she kind of feels stuck in the fact that, like, she knows that's not Robin's fault necessarily. And she doesn't want to be the kind of woman who gives Ted an ultimatum, but she's just put in this position because she sees what's happening. And I do think that it's a tough scenario, and I am inclined to side with Victoria in this particular case. And I do think that each scenario is different. There are situations where two people have truly become friends. They haven't been together in a very long time. There are no feelings there. And at that point, it becomes more about jealousy and paranoia rather than a practical reason for ending a friendship. So there are many people who are able to maintain long relationships with their exes and it's not in any way a hurdle to their current relationship because that dynamic has changed. But that's not the scenario that we see here. And that's what Lily points out as well, that when Ted goes to talk to Lily and Marshall, Marshall sides with Ted saying, yeah, it's kind of unreasonable. And Lily says, well, she does have a point. This is not a relationship that ended years ago. If Ted and Robin truly ended at the end of season 2 and they had completely moved on, then perhaps Victoria's request may seem slightly more unreasonable, even though, again, it is Robin that caused their breakup in the first place. Ted cheated on Victoria with Robin, which hurts, and he's still friends with her, so she does have a very good reason. But on top of that, Ted told Robin that he loves her earlier that year. It's literally just a few months ago that Ted told Robin that he loves her, that he wants to be with her. And since their breakup in season 2, there have been numerous times where they sort of backslid, or there's been implication that there's still maybe something there. So it really just makes sense so much from Victoria's side, and she doesn't even know any of this information. So for this particular scenario, this ultimatum of her saying you can't be friends with Robin kind of makes sense. But I also think that if you have to ask a partner, then it's a sign that maybe there are already issues in the relationship, that if you have so much distrust or you feel like your partner loves somebody else, so much so that you have to tell them that they can't see them, then I already think that the relationship is not doomed, but it's a serious red flag, and it shows that there's a lack of trust in this relationship, and it's already a major issue. So I guess to me, I think that if you have to tell the other person that they can't see someone, I feel like that's already a major damper on the relationship, because it goes to show that they already seem to like somebody else more, or there's already a major issue. So would love to know what everybody thinks of this. But another element to this, and where I think Victoria is presented kind of not in the best way, is the fact that she pushes him for marriage. So she pushes him for an engagement. She keeps hinting at it. So not only does she not talk to him as a mature adult and bring up marriage in a real way, but she drops hints at it. And then once he actually proposes, that's when she brings up the fact that she doesn't want him to see Robin. So she waited until she got the ring to then tell him, end it with Robin. And so this feels like the kind of conversation that has to happen beforehand, or at least brought up beforehand. So it just feels like a bait and trap kind of scenario where it's like, I'm waiting for you to propose and I'm pushing for you to propose. And as soon as you do it, I'm going to put my foot down and say, stop seeing your friend. Whereas I think that that's the conversation that should happen before you push for an engagement. And at the very end of this, once again, we have a bait and switch that the writers do, where Ted comes away from his conversation with Lily and Marshall saying, Victoria could be the mother of my future children. I know that Robin won't be. So it seems like Ted is walking away from this thinking, I will choose Victoria. And then when he's sitting down at the bar and he's going to talk to Robin and he's going to talk to Victoria, it's shown that he actually ended up choosing Robin. So it's funny how we see this play out quite a few times where the conversation ends and it's suggested that they're going to make one choice. And again, we see this where Ted walks away saying, Victoria could be the love of my life. She could be the mother of my future children. And then he sits down and he tells her, this is going to end. I cannot end my friendship with Robin. I hope you can understand. I hope that we could still be together, even though I don't want to end this friendship. And Victoria very reasonably says,
I really hope you get her someday.
She cannot be with Ted if Robin is still around. And I think that makes a lot of sense, given their particular history. And also given how things end up playing out. So I think that Victoria is right, based on how the show progresses. So to sum up their relationship with Victoria, I think that season 1, even though initially I wasn't that into her, I like season 1 Victoria a lot. I think that it was great and it was very romantic, very beautiful, and it worked for Ted. And then subsequently, every single appearance that she comes in, she just gets worse and worse. And ultimately, the writers turned her into a joke by the end. And the fan theory is that the writers didn't want everyone to hope that it was Victoria or wish that Victoria would be the mother. So they did this so that they can sort of destroy the idea that Victoria could be the one. And so it makes sense from the writer's perspective, because in season 1, if the show would have been canceled in one season, Victoria would have been the mother. But after it was continued, that plotline was killed. So as soon as it was renewed for a second season, it was established that Victoria was not going to be the mother. So if she were to come back, they had to ruin the character.
Ted, I only have time for one most important person in my life, and that's Lucy.
So then we get Stella. And Stella is Ted's third relationship. So Ted gets a butterfly tattoo. He wants to get it removed because he got it when he was drunk. And he's in the waiting room, and across the room, he sees Stella. And once again, it's a love at first sight kind of moment where he's infatuated. And as soon as he's in the room with her, he puts on the moves. So he becomes very charismatic, very charming, and she does go along with him. So their banter in the beginning is very light and cute, and I kind of like it. So it goes to show that they're both funny and they kind of click together. She invites him to the movies because they talk about what's the worst movie ever made. And Ted thinks it's a date, but she's not allowed to legally date him. But I also think it's kind of odd the fact that she invited her patient to the movies at the first session. So from her end, it's already a little bit odd. But anyway, so at the first session, Ted tells her that after he's done being her patient, he's going to ask her out. And she tells him that she's going to say no. But that doesn't stop Ted. So once he starts going to the sessions, every session he tries to do something cute. He tries to impress her. The second session, he tells her about how he worked with inner city kids. The third session, they just spend the whole time speaking completely in French. He makes her laugh hysterically. He makes her fall out of her chair. He juggles. He even gets a book, The Power of Me, which he sees in her office, and so he tries to read it in order to impress her. So he's really going out of his way to impress this woman who he barely knows. He just had initial chemistry with her. And this is one of those situations which is kind of the application of the Doppler-Dahmer effect, where if she wasn't into him, it'd be incredibly creepy. But because she's into him, it comes off as sweet. But in a real life scenario, I feel like this is kind of a risky move and kind of the potential to create a lot of discomfort and awkwardness. So when the gang talks about the platinum rule, I think there's something to it when it comes to a dynamic where money is exchanged hands. When someone is your client, your patient, your customer, they're paying you. And if they start hitting on you, that can create a very uncomfortable situation. So in this case, the way the show presents it, it's presented as very cute. She's enjoying his company, and he can tell that she's enjoying his company. They're having fun together. They're the ones who are speaking French together. They're the ones who are laughing together. But in other situations where the other person is not picking up on cues, it's a very awkward and uncomfortable situation to put someone in if you're paying them for a service and hitting on them at the same time. But in this case, she does like him, and it comes off as cute because we find out that she has a crush on him.
Little butterfly tattoo at the bottom of his back.
Can you stop talking about your other patients? I'm dying here, woman!
So at the end, when all the sessions are done and he knows that she has a crush on him, he asks her out, and she tells him, look, I have a daughter, and I only have time for one very important person in my life. He's very understanding, but then he looks back and he's like, wait a minute, she never said no. And that's where he's like, okay, she only has 2 minutes for lunch, and I'm going to create a whole 2-minute date and impress her. So he decides to create an entire 2-minute date for her where he enlists Wendy the waitress, he enlists Ranjit, he sets up all the tables, everything is already pre-cut up, they have time for a movie. So it's incredibly romantic how it's done, and it's a lot of pre-planning. So I think that this is one of those situations of the Doppler-Dahmer effect in action where the 2-minute date is very romantic because we could tell that she's into him. And then at the end of the 2-minute date, she kisses him and he says, look, I understand that you can't. And there's no pressure.
But I understand that you really don't have time right now, but if you ever do, give me a call.
This line from Ted is one of the times where he's very mature and he understands that Stella might not be able to, and he doesn't put pressure on her. Although this line is contradictory to everything that he was doing before. So he was clearly hitting on her very hard before. And then he found out that she has a child. And after finding out that she has a child, he still took the time to do this very big gesture, romantic type of date. And then he tells her, look, you don't have to do this. But some credit does go to Ted for the fact that at the end, he doesn't put pressure on her to go out with him. That after that date, he does make it clear that he understands that she might not be able to, and he gives her the space, and he says that she can reach out to him. So the 2-minute date happens in episode 13, and then we don't hear about Stella until episode 17, where Ted says, please remember to invite Stella when he's referring to his birthday party. So she's not in the episode, but they are dating, and then we get to see more of their relationship. The first issue that comes up in their relationship is when they decide to sleep together, and Ted finds out that it's been 5 years for Stella because she barely dated and because she was so focused on her daughter, she didn't want to let anybody in. So for her, it's a big deal because it signifies the fact that she's letting things take their course and to become serious. And then Ted blabs it it to his friends. So he tells Lily and Marshall that Stella hasn't slept with anyone for 5 years. And then Stella finds out because they talk to her about it and they kind of joke about it. Stella gets very upset about this. And I think that in this situation, I completely understand why Stella would be upset, because this feels very personal and vulnerable. And it's the kind of information which people usually feel uncomfortable and would want to keep private. And Ted knows how uncomfortable Stella was in sharing this information. I could see this type of a scenario where Stella being upset makes sense, but also she almost breaks up with him over it. And this is where Ted points out that she's waiting for and looking for an excuse to end things, that maybe this is the basis for an argument or a dispute, but maybe not a basis for breaking up. And Stella comes around, she agrees with him, and they take a massive step in their relationship when Stella introduces Lucy, her daughter, to Ted.
Come on, let's just be spontaneous. I used to dream that Tony would be spontaneous like this.
And then we get a really big issue. So Stella invites Ted to her sister's wedding, which is in 6 months. And Ted freaks out because it's 6 months away and they've only been dating for 3 months and it's too far in the future. According to Barney's rule, you can't make plans further out in the future than you've been dating the person. And with respect to Stella, Ted starts freaking out because she has a daughter. And so getting involved with her means also breaking her daughter's heart. And so he's worried that he's going to mess things up. He's worried the relationship is not going to work out. And this feels like such a massive step for him. And he starts worrying about it. And while they're sitting there, after Stella invited him to a wedding that's 6 months away, he breaks up with her, quote unquote. Or in other words, they have a fight. He thinks that they broke up, but they really didn't. And here's the big issue that I have with this scene, or just with Ted's reaction in this particular scenario. From what we know so far, Ted pursued Stella very aggressively, right? He didn't just ask her out once. He asked her out multiple times. While he was going to the sessions, he kept flirting with her. And then after being done with that, he asked her out again after finding out that she has a daughter. So it's not like this is news to him at this point. When he found out that she has a daughter, that should have been the time for him to think about it. That point when he sat down at the table with his friends and he said, well, she's a mom. That is the point where it should have clicked for him that, hey, unless you're serious, do not get involved. This means that you would have to grow up much faster. This means that you would have to be a stepfather if you're serious about this person. This means getting involved with someone who's taking care of a child who has a lot of responsibility. So if you're not ready for it, you better step away. But what does he do? He takes her out on a date, which signifies to her that this man is ready to be serious. This is a guy who knows that I have a daughter, but he wanted to pursue me anyway, which means he's ready to go the distance. So it makes sense from Stella's perspective why she would be inviting him to a wedding that's 6 months out, because this is a man who presented himself as someone who's very romantic and very ready to get involved and very ready to have a serious relationship. So for her, this is a very big deal. And Ted freaking out about going to a wedding is a, stressful situation for her. And the fact that he just breaks up with her right then and there at that table and doesn't even say it, that's a giant red flag for her. So then Ted gets into a car accident and his whole life flashes before his eyes, and he realizes that he loves Stella because Stella flashed before his eyes. He's in the hospital, and then Stella comes to the hospital to check up on him. Again, she still thinks that they just got into a fight. And then Stella finds out that they broke up, or that Ted dumped her. She gets upset again, which is very understandable. So she's coming from this perspective of, oh, I thought we just had a fight, but you broke up with me. So from her end, she's taking on a massive risk because they've only been dating for a few months. They already told each other they love each other. He tells her he wants to break up with her just because she invited him to a wedding that's 6 months out. And so she has a natural worry that, why won't this happen again? You broke up with me so easily. You could easily break up with me in the future. So they kind of split up again. And then Ted rushes to get her back. So he goes to Kitty Funland. And because he's so desperate to get her back, he proposes with a teddy bear. And Stella, seemingly overcome by the moment, or maybe because she's really into him, she says yes. Massive, massive mistake for Stella, but also a massive mistake for Ted. But then we see that they're happily engaged. They seem great. And the only issue that they have at first is the fact that they don't know each other that well. So Ted accidentally feeds her peanuts, which she's allergic to. Then they spend all night talking to each other. Then Ted makes her watch Star Wars to see if she would like it. And she lies and says that she loves it, but it's also indicative of the fact that Stella is willing to watch a movie that she doesn't like over and over again because Ted loves it. So it does show that Stella is willing to compromise on things. And then we get their third big fight, which is about New Jersey. So Stella lives in New Jersey, Ted is in Manhattan, and he gets tired of traveling back and forth because it's a long commute, so he misses out on time with his friends, and he also misses out on time with Stella. Stella tries to be a good sport about this. She invites his friends out to New Jersey, but he's still not happy about it. Then they find out that they had a miscommunication. So Ted actually thought that Stella was going to move in with him into Manhattan. And he also reacts poorly when Stella says that she's not moving.
Well, my daughter goes to school here. All of her friends are here. I've lived here my whole life. My whole family is here. This is my house. I'm on the PTA. And as of June 1st, I'm the deputy mayor.
So she has a million reasons for why she wants to stay in New Jersey, which makes sense. And Ted is reacting very poorly. He does come around by the end of the episode when he starts interacting with Lucy and he takes care of her. And the scenes with Ted and Lucy is sweet, but it also kind of makes it sad at the same time, given what happens and given their dynamic. But with respect to this particular fight, they do work it out. And then we have an intervention for Ted because everyone is worried that he doesn't know Stella that well and that he shouldn't be rushing to get married. And they're absolutely right. I think that intervention is warranted. Maybe doing intervention is a little over the top, but if you feel like a friend is making a mistake, I think there is a delicate and mature way to bring it up. And then things get even worse when Stella's sister cancels her wedding because her fiance runs off. And so Stella unilaterally says, "We'll take over the wedding for you," which makes Ted panic. Naturally, as he should be panicked because Stella didn't even ask him. And Stella says that she wants to be spontaneous and she just wants to move forward. And she wishes that her ex, Tony, was this spontaneous and would take a chance and take a risk. So this really does seem like Stella has her own issues. I feel like on a rewatch, you get an interesting perspective of who Stella is, the way that the writers present it.
Ted, I wasted years trying to get Lucy's dad to decide he was ready for this. But he never got ready for this. That's why we never got married.
And so it seems like she's pushing Ted almost as a way of compensating for the fact that she spent years waiting for one man to be ready for it. And so it seems like she almost developed a fear that everyone would get cold feet and would not rush into this, wouldn't want to do this, would always back down at the end of it. And Ted, hearing what Stella said about being spontaneous, he decides to be spontaneous, another big mistake. And then we get to the wedding, which is just 3 days later. And Ted tells Stella that Robin is coming to the wedding. Robin is flying out all the way from Japan to the wedding, and Stella gets upset that Ted invited Robin. And okay, in this scenario, I feel like I kind of side with both of them. On the one hand, I agree with Stella with the fact that if you don't want your partner's ex to be at the wedding, then I think you have a right to say that. And I think it's valid, but on Ted's side of the story, why was this not even discussed? Stella knows that Robin is part of his core friend group, that she hangs out with all of them all the time. So it's not the kind of ex that he sees once in a while. It's the kind of ex that he sees every single day that's very closely integrated into his group. So wouldn't Stella just assume that she would be invited? I mean, I get that Robin is all the way in Japan, but isn't this the kind of thing that you should bring up before the wedding? But I also see Stella's point. So I guess in a different scenario, I think that she has every right to say, please don't invite your ex to the wedding. That's perfectly valid. I just feel like this is a conversation that should have happened earlier. But then we do get a little bit of clarity, and it seems like Stella was projecting a bit. So she may have had an issue with Robin, but it was also coming from her own issues when it comes to Tony. And so Stella asks Ted to uninvite Robin. He talks to the gang, and then Barney picks up the phone and he calls Robin, but then he lies to Ted saying, well, she's already on the plane. So at this point, Ted thinks that Robin is already gone and she's off to New York, and so he cannot stop her from coming. So his best solution is to find another crisis. And so then Stella will forgive him and accept that Robin is coming to the wedding. A crisis does come up, which is when Tony refuses to drive Lucy to the wedding. And I have to say, to this point, Tony's presented as a horrible man, just like a really douchey, awful character, because the show seems to suggest that Stella had to raise Lucy on her own, right? So this is a man who fathered a child, was not ready for a relationship. Stella is a successful woman. She's working as a doctor, so she has a time-consuming job where she barely has any time, and also a full-time single mother, pining for a man who's not ready for a relationship, and he refuses to take that next step, and she spent years waiting for this guy. So this woman is taking care of her child on her own, basically. We don't know what the custody rights are here. And then this man, even though he didn't want to be with Stella, even though he's been dragging his feet for years, refuses to drive her daughter to the wedding. So he's being so petty, even though it's like, you made your choice, buddy. You didn't want to be with her. You've been dragging your feet. And then when it comes down to it, you're being such a petty asshole and you're refusing to bring the daughter. So Tony is portrayed in just an awful light. And then as soon as Ted shows up, he starts crying and being very emotional about it. So everything about Tony is a giant joke. Of course, a good way to explain this is the fact that Ted is telling his version of the story and that Tony was quite a bit different. But of course, in Ted's mind, that's how he presents Tony because of course Tony's the villain. Anyway, so Ted decides to drive Tony and Lucy to the wedding, and then Robin shows up. Stella gets upset because she sees Tony and Robin, and then Stella says, I'm gonna talk to Robin, you talk to Tony. And even up to this point, at least Stella is trying to be somewhat reasonable, and she's saying, okay, I don't like this, let's try to resolve this. I will tell Robin, I'll make myself the villain, and you can make me the villain when talking to Tony. And then Ted refuses and he still chooses to talk to Robin. And even he says, flashing forward to the future, that if he just went ahead and spoke to Tony, things could have been very different. But no, he had to talk to Robin. And as a result, Stella talks to Tony, and then Stella has feelings for Tony, and so they run off together, so Ted is left at the altar. And even though Ted created a bit of a mess with this, I think that there's still no justification for what Stella did. I think it's incredibly cruel and rude and just mean to leave someone at the altar. And even though Ted did kind of create this scenario, it doesn't mean that she has a right to just leave and abandon the wedding. What he did wasn't egregious, it was pretty bad, but what she did was absolutely egregious. And it also kind of makes her spineless because she went back to a man who refused to be with her for years, who dragged his feet for years, who then became very petty and refused to bring their child to her wedding, which I think is incredibly petty and shows what kind of character he is. And despite all of that, when he says, hey, I'm ready, she drops everything and decides, I want to be with him. So it feels like she's painted as this type of person where no matter how successful and intelligent she might be and how self-sufficient and independent, as soon as the man who's a deadbeat who refuses to do anything says, okay, maybe I'll give things a chance, she will drop everything and be with him. And up to this point, before Stella left Ted at the altar, I was siding with Stella most of the time. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but with all of their arguments, I was basically in Stella's corner. Up until her leaving him at the altar, I think that Stella was pretty good. But then everything does kind of change because she does in fact leave him at the altar.
I need a ride to New Jersey.
Okay. You'll pay for tolls, right? I'm kidding.
The story with Stella could have ended there, but it doesn't. And we have Stella going from bad to worse. So the next time Ted runs into Stella, he goes out to a restaurant and Stella comes in to get some takeout. He hides under the table, and then at the very end, he decides that he's going to confront her. And so he decides to follow her in a cab with the rest of his friends. And this is where he finds out that Stella moved to Manhattan to be with Tony. And this enrages him to no end because she was making him move out to New Jersey, but when it comes to Tony, she's all ready to move to Manhattan to be with him, and he's just livid. And so he pictures himself getting really angry and giving her a whole speech about how she made a mistake and she chose the wrong guy.
You made a really, really, really bad choice.
And I have to say, I kind of agree with him based on the recollection that Ted gives us. If, in fact, Stella waited years for a man who wouldn't live up to his standards and who wouldn't be a good father and who wouldn't be with her, and he only decided to be with her after she was ready to get married and he only came after her when she was already at her wedding, that makes Tony a pretty bad guy. And the fact that she's willing to move to Manhattan for him seems to suggest that it was his decision, and Stella is willing to, again, drop everything to be with him. So even though she has very good reasons to stay in New Jersey for her daughter, for the house, for the fact that she's very involved in her community, she's willing to drop all of that because Tony's in Manhattan, and so she'll go wherever Tony wants to go. But Ted sees that they're a very happy little family, and so he softens and he accepts it, which is kind of big of him. I mean, she did leave him at the altar. He was crushed, but seeing them all together as a family does make him realize that maybe they are right for each other. But it's not over. So next time Ted runs into Stella and Tony, he's very nice to them and he's very mature, and the gang applauds him for how mature he is, and it's great. So it shows that Ted can be mature and that he's accepted it, and that he understands why Stella wants to be with Tony. And then Tony comes to Ted and he's like, look, you were crushed, you seemed so upset, I feel very guilty. And Tony says, I have a shit ton of money, my family's very loaded, which would maybe perhaps explain why Stella is so willing, because how does Tony live in Manhattan in an apartment when he's only a karate instructor? Tony tries really hard to give Ted a job. He offers him a bunch of projects, including building a murder house, and Tony has just a poor judge of character. And then ultimately, Tony offers Ted a job at Columbia as a professor. And Ted is like, look, man, I don't want anything. I'm not crushed. Stella is an awful human being. She left me at the altar. I don't want her.
I'm better off without her. She's all yours, buddy.
And because of this, Tony breaks up with Stella. And again, it goes to show what kind of a man Tony is. So Tony is willing to break up with Stella so easily after talking to Ted, just because Ted says that Stella is awful and she left him at the altar and he doesn't want to be with her because she's bad. So naturally, we could see where Ted is coming from by saying that. And Tony, based on that, is willing to dump the mother of his child, the woman who he was so desperate to get back at the wedding. He's like, oh no, I'm going to back off. And then we see that Stella is even more spineless and also kind of bad because she goes to Ted and she begs Ted to get Tony back for her. So here we see the fact that not only did she leave him at the altar, but she's also asking him to bring her ex back. None of this makes sense, right? I mean, Ted is totally vindicated. The fact that he tells Stella off, he's absolutely in the right. And it's a great moment for Ted because he's right in this moment that she has no right to ask him this and she's being ridiculous. But also, what the hell is going on with Stella? Even as a character, it just makes no sense. So this is a man that you've sacrificed everything for. You waited for years and you drop everything the second that he says he's ready. But then he dumps you over practically nothing. And you're still standing there begging your ex to get Tony back? Well, what is this? So Stella agrees to pick up Barney from jail, and then Ted agrees to talk to Tony. And then we have this moment in the car where Stella and Ted talk about love. And Ted says that he's tired, that he's waiting for her, and that he doesn't understand why he cannot have these same things. And he says that he wants what Lily and Marshall have, and he wants what Stella and Tony have, which again is kind of ridiculous because it's like, man, what do you mean you want what Stella and Tony have? They don't really have much because Tony's willing to dump Stella over practically anything. I don't know if Stella and Tony should be the standard that Ted should be looking up to. But regardless, so they part ways very amicably. And then we get The Wedding Bride in season 5. So The Wedding Bride comes out and it's based on the relationship between Ted and Stella and Tony, and everything paints Ted in a terrible light. So he's being played by Chris Kattan and he's played as a complete joke, as a douchebag who treats Stella terribly. And there are some things that are accurate to Ted based on how he describes it. There are the red boots, the way that he pronounces encyclopedia, just all these little details that do align with who Ted is. But also, there are a lot of details that are completely inaccurate. So, for example, that romantic 2-minute date is transformed into a situation where Jed Mosley is just saying, I only have time to have sex with you for 2 minutes, which is in direct contradiction to how things originally played out, according to Ted.
Here's the plan. Take a horse-drawn carriage through the park, and it just so happens the Philharmonic is playing an open-air...
Ted, 5 years.
Straight to the hotel?
Straight to the hotel.
Based on his recollection of events, Stella is the one who just wanted to rush right to it when they already made that decision. But in The Wedding Bride, everything is demonstrated to be as Ted's fault. So when he proposes, it's very nonchalant. He just gives her a teddy bear to just get Stella off his back, even though originally Ted was just so desperate to get Stella back and he proposed because it was spontaneous and he wanted to prove to her that he really wants to be with her. So The Wedding Bride is awful, and it kind of does show that Stella may be not a great person because she decided to make a film about their relationship, but also putting Ted in the worst possible light. However, when it comes to this, of course, it's important to consider perspective. And I think that this is something that comes up with the show in general. And when it comes to perspective, it's tough discussing this show because, of course, Ted is presented as an unreliable narrator. But then the question is, how much should we credit him with and how much should we discredit him with? And when it comes to even analyzing the show, it becomes very challenging because for all we know and for how the writers present it, we could just say, pretty much he made up 90% of it, right? So like everything that he says could be completely exaggerated. Everything that presents could be a lie. So when it comes to this defense of, perspective, it's really hard to discuss the show, but it's also kind of fun because that's what memory is. And that's what it is when it comes down to talking about people in general. When we hear a story, we're only getting one side of the story. And in this case, we are only getting one side of the story. So when it comes to The Wedding Bride, there are different ways to look at it. One way to look at it is the fact that what Ted told us about Stella might not be accurate, and that perhaps Ted was a lot more of a villain than he portrayed himself to be. That even as he presented things very romantically, even as he's presented things maybe from his end that he wasn't perfect in that relationship, that maybe he has seen himself more as a hero, more of a good guy than he really was, and that perhaps the truth is somewhere in between. So the wedding bride and Ted's recollection are two sides of the story, and we can't actually say for sure who is right and who is wrong, or maybe the answer, the truth, is somewhere in the middle. And when it comes to these stories, it's hard for us to know what the truth actually is.
It's exactly how it happened. He got every part right, even that thing with the nunchucks.
And so there are different ways to look at this possible film. Obviously, this is a sitcom. It's all done for entertainment. This was done for comedy. None of this is really relevant. But when it comes to looking at these characters and looking at, how it translates to people's perceptions, we are getting two different sides of the story. So that's what makes it so interesting. And then the final saga is that The Wedding Bride 2 comes out in season 9. And when it comes to Stella, we see that their relationship ends, and it ends in a lot of heartbreak, but ultimately they end up being on good terms, which is a good sign and shows maturity that in their last moment in the car, Ted is no longer upset with Stella. He's very understanding and he's hopeful for her and Tony. And then later on when he calls her looking for the locket, Stella seems to be very calm about it. And personally for me, when it comes to Stella, I liked the character in the beginning and I thought it was a fun little introduction. So we do see that he goes into a new relationship. It's his way of getting over Robin, so it's the next stage. But a lot of it felt kind of rushed, and we also get to see the issues that he has in relationships, that he's not ready, and that he does this thing where he's very intense and he's very aggressive and he tries really hard to get a relationship. And that really demonstrated for her that, oh, this guy really wants to be with me. But then as soon as commitment came into the picture, he started to backtrack. So we get this element of Ted when it comes to Stella, of the fact that he's over the top and that he has this idea of love and this commitment and this marriage, but then when it comes down to it, he's just not ready. And so there's this pattern of behavior with him where he has these grandiose gestures and then he backpedals. And that's a perfect example with Stella. And when it comes to their relationship, I would say that if we take Ted's words as true, if we accept his recollection of events, then I would say that Stella is pretty good and a pretty great before we get to the wedding. So once they get to the wedding, and basically when she decides to leave Ted for Tony is when I really stop liking the character, because she just becomes ridiculous. And her whole thing with Tony is just, I don't know. It paints her in a light of this type of person, of this type of individual who would just drop at everything for their ex. So even at the end where Tony breaks up with Stella, she's still so desperate to get him back. And it's just interesting. It paints a very interesting dynamic. And I think that Stella was pretty great until that point. And then afterwards, they just keep ruining her character. And then at the very end with the wedding bride, it just, she's not that great.
I love that you guys live in a dorm. So American. It's like, let's all eat bologna sandwiches and be racist.
Then we get Karen, who is my favorite of Ted's girlfriends. I mean, don't get me wrong, she is absolutely awful, but I also love her and I think she's the best, and I'm so glad that we got her, and I wish we had more of her. And also, I think that first, she should belong in the beginning because technically she was his high school girlfriend. And second of all, I know she's not really supposed to be on this list because they only date for a few episodes, but at the same time, they did have a long relationship, we just don't see most of it. So to start from the beginning, Karen is Ted's on-again, off-again girlfriend from high school through college, and they date in high school, and then when they go off to college, they try to do long distance. And we find out that Ted cheated on Karen during orientation week, so he hooks up with a girl who he thinks is Lily, but it's actually Alyssa Lesky. Then he calls Karen, crying, apologizing, quoting Descartes. So he is remorseful and apologetic, but also it's the first sign that Ted does cheat. And then in season 4, we find out more about Karen, how she's just a massive cheater.
I want to tell you something.
Really? Because I think I want to tell you the same thing.
Is your thing I had sex with my philosophy professor last night?
So she's super pretentious and she would cheat on Ted with other guys. She would actually bring back the guys to his dorm room, cheat on him, and then when Ted would catch her, she would deflect. And what's interesting is that Ted always takes her back. And it doesn't matter how awful Karen is. And Karen is depicted as absolutely awful. So on the Paris trip, Karen starts hooking up with the waiter while she's hanging out with the group. So she's blatantly cheating on him. She has no regard for him. She cheats on him multiple times, and every single time, Ted takes her back because she's his first, she's just an important part of his life, and we find out that Karen moves to New York. Ted meets up with her again, he starts seeing her again, and he doesn't tell the group. And in the present day, Karen is as pretentious and as awful as always.
I don't want to cause a scene, but your wine list has a Chateauneuf de Pape listed under your Côte de Provence. You might want to alert your sommelier.
And personally, I love that aspect. I love how pretentious she is because it's hysterical. They're just so douchey together, and it's great. And I love it. I mean, she's awful. She's awful in the past, how pretentious she is. She's awful in the future. But what's fun to see is that even with this terrible character, I can kind of see why Ted was dating her in the first place, because he also becomes pretentious. I mean, it's to an exaggerated level, and he's never as bad as Karen is. But we could also see them together. They have some things in common. They both correct people. They both cheat. They're both very pretentious.
All right, first of all, my parents live in Ohio. I live in the moment.
And even though Karen is absolutely awful, they have this common ground. And when he's around her, there's this side of him that comes out that doesn't come out with other characters or with other romantic relationships. And it almost feels like it kind of works for him specifically, where I think he enjoys being that part of him.
You're the fan of 2002 Chiantis.
Ew, no, you're the fan of 2002 Chiantis.
And so at the very least, I could see him enjoying that dynamic, even though every single time Karen breaks his heart. So going back to the present day, quote unquote, Ted starts dating Karen, and then he finds out that Karen was actually cheating with him on her boyfriend. So she has not changed her behavior. She's just as awful as she was back in college, except now Ted is not the one who's being cheated on. So he gives her an earful and he tells her that she's awful and that she doesn't have the guts to break up with someone. He walks away, but then he calls her again. She says that she understands, she's never going to do it again, she feels awful, and then get back together, they start dating, and the group is very upset with him because, again, Karen is awful. Fortunately, they do end up breaking up because Lily puts Robin's earring in Ted's bed, which leads Karen to think that he's cheating on her. And what's funny is that in his defense, Ted says that he has always been faithful to her.
Why should I believe you?
Maybe because I've always been faithful to you.
Huge mistake last night.
But there is something worth highlighting about this relationship, even though it's very brief and most of it happens off screen before we meet Ted. Personally, I think it's worthwhile to consider the fact that Ted kept going back to Karen. No matter how bad she was, he still acted like she was amazing. He could not let her go. So even though she was awful to him, he kept coming back. And even in the present day, after he grew up as an adult, he still went back to Karen, knowing how bad she treated him in the past. And then in the present day, after finding out that she has not grown, she hasn't changed, even though she claims that she's older and wiser and better, she's still a cheater, and he sees this in the modern day. And despite that, he still takes her back, which I think says something about Ted, that if he's quote unquote in love, it doesn't matter who the person is, how terrible they are, because with Karen, she was awful, and that still couldn't stop him. Literally, it had to be to such an extreme degree that Lily had to create a cheating scenario to start a fight. And what ultimately broke them up is the fact that Karen said that Ted can no longer be friends with Lily. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't this cheating scenario. It wasn't the fact that she cheated on him millions of times. It was the fact that Karen said you can no longer be friends with Lily, which by extension means that Ted can no longer be friends with Marshall. And I think this is kind of fun because this brings back that question of if your significant other asks you to stop being friends with someone, is it justified? Is it fair? Is it an unfair ultimatum? And we have these two different dynamics here. So here we have another example where Karen says you can no longer be friends with this person, and it's a contrast to when Victoria said you can no longer be friends with Robin. But in this particular case, it's easier for us to side with Ted and say, well, no, dump Karen, your friends are more important. In this case, it feels less justified. Ted's relationship with Lily and Marshall is so much stronger and longer, and they are a lot more loyal to him than Karen ever was. So it's an easier solution where he would rather dump Karen than lose Lily and Marshall. But I absolutely love Karen as an addition. Every time she's pretentious and douchey, it's fantastic. And I think it shows an interesting side of Ted that he just doesn't care almost. That when he's in love, when he's pursuing someone, and when he wants to be with someone, it's just this constant push and pull dynamic where no matter how much they abuse him, mistreat him, push him away, he'll just keep bouncing back and jumping right back into the relationship, no matter how unhealthy it is, and he will claim that it's okay, and he has to be physically dragged out of it.
You say you want a family, you say you want to meet the one, but you are always chasing the wrong women.
To sum up these relationships, I think that they all played a valuable role in Ted's story. So when we get Victoria, she's obviously a necessary hurdle for Ted and Robin, and it's kind of unfortunate. She's kind of like Karen from The Office. So it's this new love interest that's introduced that's designed to put a wedge between the will they, won't they couple. And I do like how Victoria was introduced into the show, and I think that she was great in the first season. And then Stella is really his next stage, where he seems to be over Robin. And what I found interesting is that when we look at Ted's relationship with Stella, it seems like Robin is basically out of the picture. Of course, she's still around as a friend, but there's no discussion about Robin. The only potential issue is when Ted invites Robin to the wedding, but it really seems like he's inviting her as a friend, and then he feels really uncomfortable telling her no because he asked her to get on a plane to come visit. And the only issues that they really have is with the fact that they don't know each other that well, that they have disagreements with respect to where they live. So I feel like Stella was a necessary step. And of course, Stella leads to Tony, which leads to Columbia, which leads to Cindy, which leads to Tracy. So she's a cog in the machine of Ted's love life. And then of course we have Karen, who I just love and is amazing. And I think that she demonstrates the fact that Ted sometimes just has this need to be in a relationship, or he just kind of falls into these situations. And even though he thinks he's in love, or even though he thinks that this person is great, it doesn't mean that she's right for him. And I think that's a valuable lesson overall, that even if you knew a person in high school or in college, and even if you guys were together at the very formative period in your life, doesn't mean that they're right for you. Sometimes people fall back on comfort. And for him, Karen was comfort. But just because he's comfortable with her and just because he knows her doesn't mean it's right. So next up, I'm going to cover the remaining relationships. So Zoe, Tracy, and Robin. And it's going to be a very long video, so I decided to chop it up into 2. So I hope you guys come back for part 2. And if you stuck around, honestly, thank you so much for sitting through all of this. And I would love to know your thoughts on this. And if you learned anything from Ted through his experiences, I would also love to hear about it. So thank you so much. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you next time.